Today's episode is brought to you by Alexandra Park BJJ. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a full-contact martial art and combat sport that was developed in Brazil in the 20th century. With roots in Judo and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, has been developed and refined into a unique grappling art with the aim to allow a smaller and weaker individual to beat a bigger and stronger opponent with the application of proper technique. Based in Muswell Hill, North London, Alexandra Park BJJ's classes are designed so that you can develop your fitness levels, balance, coordination and flexibility in a no-pressure environment, and to provide the opportunity to start a new sport at a reasonable price. At Alexandra Park BJJ, we aim to be inclusive so that everyone can benefit from this incredible art, not just the athletic or ultra-competitive. To book your free class, head over to alexandraparkbjj.co.uk or email inquiries at alexandraparkbjj.co.uk.
Welcome to Audiobookish, an audiobook review and discussion podcast looking at audiobooks both big and small, as well as radio plays, narrative podcasts, anything audiobook-ish. This podcast may contain spoilers, rants, curse words, mispronunciations of names and places, and more.
Hello everyone, you're listening to Audiobookish. My name's Fahad Rahman, and as always I'm joined by Poppy Knight.
Hello.
And today we are going to be discussing Once a Monster, a reimagining of the legend of the Minotaur, written by Robert Dinsdale and narrated by Justin Avoth. London, 1861. 10-year-old Nell belongs to a crew of mudlarks who work a stretch of the Thames along the Ratcliffe Highway. An orphan since her mother died 4 years past, leaving Nell with only broken dreams and a pair of satin slippers in her possession. She spends her days dredging up coals, copper and pieces of iron spilled by the river barges, searching for treasures in the mud in order to appease her master, Benjamin Murdstone. But one day Nell discovers a body on the shore. It's not the first corpse she's encountered, but by far the strangest. Nearly 7 feet tall, the creature has matted hair covering his legs, and on his head are the suggestions of horns. Nell's fellow mudlarks urge her to steal his boots and rifle his pockets, but as she ventures closer, the figure draws breath, and Nell is forced to make a decision which will change her life forever. So this was when we was kind of discussing which book we wanted to do next. This is one that you picked out, Poppy. How did you hear about it? What kind of drew you to it?
Yeah, so this was just a case of kind of browsing, looking for something next to listen to. I was intrigued by the cover. It's got a really nice cover, and the whole kind of myth retelling thing intrigued me. And then listening to the preview, I really liked the sound of the narrator. And Justin Avoth's done a book for us at work as well. But I really liked the sample that I heard. So I thought, plot sounds interesting, looks cool, grabbed me, and the narration sounds great. Let's give it a go.
Yeah, cool. So you kind of mentioned the narration. I think that might be a good place to start. I love Justin's voice. Yeah, I think he's just got one of those voices. Tell me a story, Justin. It's just to listen to kind of just want to listen to his voice. He's got a great pace to the way that he reads. Sometimes it's, I think, something we picked up when we was listening to Bob Mortimer's autobiography. Sometimes he was like occasionally out of breath. You never really got that with Justin. You seemed to be kind of control of the narration all the way through. He's got this, how would you describe his voice? It's kind of like deep and like how would you describe his voice?
Yeah, it is very deep, isn't it? Kind of is resonant the word? Is that sort of the one? Yeah, it's beautiful, very rich. Yes, very commanding. Yeah, and I'm completely with you about the pacing. And I'd specifically noted there was like an emotional moment. I think it was talking about Nell's mother, or it was like a flashback to a conversation with them or something like that. And there was a real definite pause in the sentences where there was, an important message being put across. And it was kind of like a few words and a pause and a few more words. That was beautifully done. But it also I know for a fact that if I were reading it on the page, my eyes would read the next line far quicker than, the pause waiting for Justin to say it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so in that sense, regardless of whether, I would do a bit of a performance in my head of making it more dramatic and more pausey and you know, slow it down for himself a little bit, I know my eyes wouldn't stop looking to the next line and reading them and stuff like that. And so that just highlighted for me something that was really nice about listening to this audiobook, and then also one of the nice things about listening to an audiobook is having that pace dictated to you by someone else, someone who's a real pro at matching the tone and the emotion to the speed. That, yeah, if I'm reading it, my eyes can't help just reading those words. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. The other thing that I quite enjoyed was the way that he captured the characters as well, especially I think the work that he does with Murdstone, I think is especially quite good. Would you say there's like point of view chapters in this?
Kind of, yeah. It's not like from a first person, but you certainly shift perspective between the different characters who I'm sure we'll go on to talk about. And I agree with you, yeah, his performance of Murdstone is really good. In general, all the voice is really good. One criticism I sort of had at the start was that his Nell didn't really feel like a 10-year-old girl.
Yeah.
Kind of, as you'd expect, it would be difficult with a voice as we've described for him to do a 10-year-old girl convincingly. However, the more you sit with this audiobook, that doesn't matter anymore. You know, like you might at the beginning think, that doesn't sound much like a 10-year-old girl, and it take you out of it. But it doesn't take you out of it as you keep going. Like, that's just Nell's voice. And the character of Nell sort of goes through the audio into your brain, you know what I mean? Without really registering the mode by which it is, the pitch by which it is, or anything like that. So yeah, I'd certainly prefer that to if he'd done a squeaky young girl voice or anything like that would have A, sounded naff, and B, ruined the tone of this book in general. So yeah, while I thought that was criticism at the start, I didn't by the end, and I thought all his voices were really good, and kind of subtle changes of accent as well. So kind of like a bit more received for Sophia and things like that was all really good, and all the character that he gave to the performances, just fabulous. Yeah.
And it's a really fine line that he has to walk to kind of balance on, because particularly with this kind of like, it's sort of that Oliver Twist type era. And
yes, I was going to say,
easily, what here, governor, kind of like, you know. And there were a few occasions that it might have like fell into that, but it never kind of like, for me, kind of, he walked that line really, really well, because it is, you know, the story, it is set in London. It's set kind of like mostly on like that kind of, you know, like a working class environment, that kind of Cockney area. So yes, you know, his performances of the character voices were, I think he did a good job with those. So yes, I think like just for the narration alone, I think it's probably worth listening to.
Yeah, definitely. And like, because it's so kind of like melodic as well, and I think the book is so kind of lyrical, it's so visual, like as in there's so much description, there's so much metaphor, that it just feels right to have it told to you orally, and certainly with a voice as commanding as you say as Justin's. I really enjoyed that experience for this one as audio. It really suited it well. And then also commending the writing. I really liked how it was so lyrical and metaphorical, and everything that happened there was a metaphor kind of thing, you know. I could see why some people might not like it, but as someone who really likes that, the fact that it was jam-packed with all that, I absolutely loved.
Yeah, I mean, it draws on an awful lot of different sources. There's, you know, Greek mythology. There's obviously the class history. I think like class plays a really big role in the story, kind of class, ambition, you know, setting it in like 1861, kind of where, you know, London is, and, you know, culturally and financially at that point in time. Yeah, and kind of drawing on like kind of sort of subtly exploring ideas around faith and memory and forgiveness and kind of metamorphosis as well. There's a lot kind of packed into a story that also contains a lot of drama, you know, a fair amount of action, as well as you mentioned, kind of, you know, the quality of the writing here is superb. Cool. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was actually the use of like Greek myths. How did you feel that was kind of used?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. It was a bit of Greek myth that I didn't know very well, the story of the Minotaur. I did do a little bit of Googling of it before I went into this book, because I was like, I don't want to go into it completely not knowing anything. But I thought that was really good. I thought it was really interesting how it drops bits of it. It's not overkill. It's not a retelling. It is a kind of like, well, what it does is it brings ancient Greek myth, but what if it were less ancient kind of thing? It's obviously not bringing it to the present day for the plot of the story, being 1860s, but it's putting it in a different context, and it's not the same story, but it's some themes you can take from it, stuff like that. I thought that was really interesting. What about you?
So it's interesting how like previous books that you've read can influence how you're reading a book at the moment. So like I think a couple of years ago I read Circe by Madeline Miller.
Okay, yeah,
and that's kind of like so it's a great novel. I'd highly recommend you check it out if you've not read it. But that's kind of it's a sort of a feminist reimagining of like the myth of Circe, and kind of instead of treating the Greek gods as these sort of like noble figures, it kind of actually recasts them as these capricious, monstrous and it's actually one of the lines I think that's said in the book. If someone does have like unlimited power, then not necessarily, what's to stop them from behaving awfully? If you've got that much power, there's nothing to stop you from behaving badly. And that's one of the themes that's kind of explored in Circe. But there is a section in that book that is about the Minotaur, and that interpretation, I kind of like, I brought a little bit of that book into my interpretation about this story. So it's kind of like, I know it's like the Minotaur is kind of like, it's an archetype, but it's also a character as well. So like Minos is the name of the Minotaur is his own character, but you can't help but bringing those influences when you are reading a story like this. And as you mentioned, this is more like, I wouldn't say it's a reimagining. It's more like a what if the Minotaur had survived and was put in this situation, how would that kind of look? So yes, I think that's it was interesting, kind of like having to kind of put that in like a separate book and not let that influence the way that I was listening to this.
Yeah,
well.
Totally. And sort of one thing I was thinking during it was kind of like what it assumes and kind of what the characters in the book know of the myth is kind of just clear cut, black and white. The Minotaur is a monster. Full stop. And this book is sort of questioning that. And I wanted to know what your thoughts were on part of the way it questions that, and specifically the kind of mechanism by which Minos is more bull versus more human. And kind of, it's slightly spoilery, but I think we're okay to sort of say this here, is that a large part of the book is the idea that when he's more monstrous, he's more like the animal half of him. And when he's more kind of, I guess, virtuous, for want of a better word, he's more human. And that manifests in changes to his physical appearance, changes to his voice, kind of completely non-verbal as the Minotaur, and then grunting to a lack of clarity to his voice, to a more clarity kind of thing. I was kind of, I don't fully know how to feel about this, because it's challenging the idea about the Minotaur isn't necessarily a monster, and yet in doing so it suggests that the only way for him to not be a monster is to shed one half of himself, the part that makes him a Minotaur, so like kind of going back into the past, and it sort of talks about how his siblings back in the myth treated him, how he was treated as a monster when he was kind of split between the two. It was a man and beast, and kind of like but he wasn't necessarily bad then. It was kind of how they treated him, very much of kind of Frankenstein's story, which I think is very much a connection with this book. And yet it seems a slightly different message to say that he sheds the beast half of him in order to be good. That sort of suggests that he couldn't be good as the Minotaur. I wondered what you thought about that.
So I think it's a tricky thing to kind of like to explore it. I think there was one line in the book, I wish I'd written it down. It's kind of like he's always going to be like the beast. I think, the beast is physically manifested in more kind of like violent acts that he and when you, I think one of the ideas it's trying to explore is like the more awful things you do, the more you lose yourself to awful things. I mean, especially it's interesting how his kind of character arc almost mirrors Murdstone's character arc, because essentially they're both looking for the same thing, a way out of the situation that they've found themselves in. And, Minos is desperately trying not to fall into his baser urges. So I'm not too, I think you can be two things at the same time. There are kind of multitudes within every person. So I'm not too sure where I sit on it. I think, I'm not too sure the book knows what its message is either in that regard.
I sort of get you, because it kind of feels like it's a bit of a kind of a, like we say, a kind of Frankenstein message of, if you treat someone poorly, they'll become a monster kind of thing. And also a not judging by appearance and people being different. But then the fact that he then assimilates to a human, sort of by being good, sort of contradicts that a little bit. And especially it's a bit problematic when you consider things about like disfigurement, obviously, and the villainization of that as well. And also problematic with the idea that his eyes go blue the more good he gets.
I think there's a very
I didn't like that
it's
bit.
A bit like it's kind of Disney's like Beauty and the Beast, really, wasn't it? It's kind of I'm not too sure.
So there are definitely some symbolisms in it that, don't quite fit with that idea of not treating people who are different as monsters, not expecting them to be monsters, and then going, see, now he's not a monster, he fits these visual things, and his voice going clearer and stuff like that as well. Especially there was a part where it compared his voice to that of a deaf girl who does not feature anywhere else in the book apart from that sentence. And I thought it was really unkind to use that as an insult on his voice, certainly. And then sort of similarly, we have the character of Sophia, who I really like, and she is missing her ring finger. And again, there's potentially some problematic things around the way that that's used, as so much in literature disfigurements have, as a kind of like to make it intriguing and kind of that playing up to the idea of it being a mystery surrounding it and things like that it's difficult, because by nature of talking about a minotaur and how would they fit into a human society, you're gonna ask, and certainly a human society of 1800s, you're gonna ask questions about how will people treat them. The idea of the freak show is going to come into there, and I feel like this book wanted to address those things and wanted to be on the right side of history about them, for, again, want of a better phrase, but I'm not sure it necessarily always did, or maybe had a bit further to go to do that in the best, most sensitive way. I mean, I don't think it bothered me as much as it might have bothered you. I think, certainly the stuff about, and there's, I don't want to kind of like bring like racism into it, because like racism doesn't really form part of the book, but there is this kind of idea of kind of like, the civilized man looking a certain way, for sure,
and stuff like that. So
that was why the blue eyes bit really worried me.
No. But the text is a little bit unclear there, I think so. But it's I think it is, the story generally is told with like the best intentions.
Oh yes, exactly.
So it's not like, I don't think it's
no I agree, I think it raises definitely some interesting questions. Another interesting question I wanted your thoughts on that's about this is because, like you said, there's kind of like forgiveness is one of them, and it's sort of interesting in this book as to made complicated by someone living for thousands of years. But, the idea of, can people change? Should people be forgiven? How much does someone have to become a new person for their atrocities to not be done by them anymore? Kind of where does the responsibility lie? That kind of thing is certainly not answered in this book, but it's a question that lingered with me from finishing it.
Yeah, I think one of the clear things that is, and it's maybe one of my criticisms with the text, that there is like one of the themes is like repetition, kind of like that the idea of you repeating cycles over and over again. And there are chapters where it's kind of almost repeated verbatim, where the Minotaur is trying to recycle through his memories.
Yes, there is some of that, but I actually do think there was a repetition in the audio. Was something I was going to bring up.
So was that towards the end of the book, right?
Yeah. So at the end of chapter 22, I believe, it repeats 15 minutes of chapter 18.
Yeah, that's not just me going crazy.
No, that's not just you. Okay. So no, because I went and checked it then against the ebook, because I was like, I swear I've heard this exact thing before. Yeah. Which, as you say, it could have been a repetition, and there are certainly parts where, he's kind of going back through his memories to when he was in the labyrinth in ancient Greece versus other adventures he's been on, and other experiences of his life, and then to the present day. But no, that one in particular I'm pretty sure was an error.
Okay, all right, fine. But the idea of repeating cycles and memory, I think one of the big parts of the book is it's really hard to change your behavior, because it's so easy to fall back into doing the things and being the person that you were. And I think one of the big themes in the story is it's hard to taking active actions to be a better person is not easy. And kind of one of the big words in the book is like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to kind of behave that way again. And I think like forgiveness is, I'm not necessarily sure that it is a theme in the book, rather than it's more about, because forgiveness, it's from the person that you've wronged. And I don't think Minos really is confronted by anyone that he's wrong, because most of his actions, but it is about redemption and change. And as someone who did study like criminal justice at university, is like, unless you kill everyone that's done like a wrong act, you are going to be releasing people out into society. So you should try and to equip them to behave better whilst they're out there. And so I think that is one of the things. But definitely he's like a beast. He's a monster. He's being used to do probably commit atrocities, both willingly, unwillingly, and all that sort of thing. So it's him. The big part of the story is him trying to find a way out of the maze, or the labyrinth, if you will, of that bad behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and totally with you on that kind of, it's about the redemption thing. And I couldn't help thinking about, well, how does this link to, as you say, kind of criminal justice kind of thing, and stuff. It's interesting. Again, don't have an answer for it, but did find it an interesting question that the book sort of raises. And then, completely agree with you that power of the word no is a massive thing in this that I really liked. And how it was kind of like, with both what Minos does and with the character Nell as well, they both use it, and it's kind of a mix between saying no to others and, kind of denying others agency over you, things like that, but then also that no to restrain your own instincts and to make that choice within yourself as well. That was a big thing, kind of like, no is about like defiance and then also restraint. And then there was a really, really lovely part about the word yes, and that also being powerful, and that being about kind of like confidence and opportunity and assuredness and things like that. That was a beautiful little parallel to all the stuff that had been going on about no and what it meant to the characters. That I thought that was absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And talking about the characters, the book's got such a great cast of characters. So we've mentioned Nell, we've mentioned Minos. So that Nell lives with basically this kind of like Oliver Twisty kind of like gang of like miscreants, and Benjamin Murdstone is very much in that kind of Fagin role. And I think Benjamin Murdstone might be one of the best villains I've encountered for a very long period of time. Have you got any kind of like notes about Murdstone?
Yeah, mostly just kind of in agreement with you is that, it was very much set up as a Fagin type character, partly in the position that he has with the Mudlarks, he has this band of kind of kids, though I think some of them are older, that are scrounging the riverbed or the side of the river of the Thames for treasures that could have washed up for him, and he's using their labour to elevate himself, and he's a fascinating character, and why he's so preoccupied with status and his own kind of like what's the word I'm looking for, like his conscience, his like ideas of what are right and wrong kind of thing is interesting, and a very powerful, interesting character that I think it's certainly my intrigue in him is definitely helped by how amazingly Justin performed him as well, that really brought him to life, certainly. I
mean, he's like definitely fascinating character. I would love to kind of like read a book about like Benjamin Murdstone's like adventures prior to the events in this book. He's kind of this idea of he sees himself very much as like a self-made man that's dragged himself up from like kind of abject poverty to being. I think they do mention in the book that he was a knight of the realm at one point. I think they did call him Sir Benjamin Murdstone, and he's fallen hard time, and his absolute almost blind driving ambition to get back to the status that he once had, and how that drives him to do quite despicable things in the book. But there's there is the other half of him where he's helping these poor children, he's exploiting them, and there is one of his former wards has become a doctor, and he's kind of raised him to kind of like that point as well. So there is kind of good stuff that he's done, but there is also a lot of bad stuff in there. So I think he's a fantastic character. It's very very compelling to kind of like listen to his exploits, and I would genuinely love to kind of like read like a book on his like prior adventures. I think that'd be kind of fascinating, because it's only hinted at kind of how he gained his stuff and then how he's consequently lost it all.
Phil, no, I'm completely with you. It's absolutely fascinating, and like you touched on earlier, a really interesting parallel with his kind of mix of good and bad qualities and the choices that he makes, the route he chooses to go down, and that of Minos as well. And this is where I feel like it's kind of strong in that intended message we assume of that kind of like anyone can be a monster. You know, you don't have to be born of half man and half bull to be a monster. That I really liked that kind of like, you might look at him and see a gentleman, but actually he's a monster, kind of thing that is really, really interesting. And
I think that one of the other things that I found fascinating that between, and we can kind of say that Benjamin, Minos, and Nell are the main characters in the story, is that there's this like root core of like stubbornness. So all three of them, kind of like Nell is, after kind of the inciting incident, Nell is absolutely determined to find a better life for herself, and not kind of like, because the other mudlarkers are kind of sold on this story that Benjamin tells them about these eight great trades.
I think it's 7 great trades, and Minos is his 8th.
Seven great trades that kind of like raised him from the river to like to a high status, and they're kind of sold on that lie that they just keep by the river, you're going to find something that's going to be able to, you'll be able to trade this for that, and then you'll be able to, and like Nell's kind of decided, what, that's not the route that I'm going to take, and there's a stubbornness to her, and it's kind of the same stubbornness that's in Minos, not to be the beast that he is, and the same stubbornness in Benjamin Murdstone is that he's determined not to die in poverty by the river, which I think all three of them, there's like, I can kind of understand that character's motivation, and I can kind of understand that character's motivation. Their motivations aren't inherently bad or evil, it's just kind of like what that motivation leads them to do is kind of quite interesting and different for all
it's fascinating.
3 characters.
And you're making me even more keen to read The Seven Great Trades, the prequel to... So yeah, no, definitely. And then another character in here is Sophia Chrétien.
Yeah.
I cannot pronounce that. Don't know my French very well. But yeah, and she is a... ballerina previously of the French ballet, and it was a part of this book that I wasn't expecting, the ballet part, which actually features a huge part of the story, and I actually surprisingly really quite enjoyed. I think potentially helped by the fact that I only a couple months ago listened to a really good audiobook called I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me by Jameson Shea and narrated by Crystalline Lloyd, which was also about the ballet, the Parisian ballet. Also, one of the ballets that features heavily is Giselle, which features heavily in this one. So, yeah, it's not a topic that I know a lot about. I don't go and watch a lot of ballets or anything like that. But I really enjoyed that book. Oh, yeah, and also that book about monsters. And do you choose to be a monster for success or do you not? There were so many parallels with that book. So it was really interesting listening to this one after that one. And then, even though I wasn't expecting the ballet bit, I really did like those scenes and that part of the story. I
enjoyed that as well. I did find it kind of quite interesting about the ballet stuff, because for those of you not aware, like people's, like especially in blokey context, people say, oh, we're not doing ballet here. Ballet is brutal, dude. It's so physically and emotionally demanding. I teach, as you're probably aware if you listen to the adverts at the start of the podcast, I teach martial arts, and I think probably a lot of ballet dancers are probably, especially if you're doing it professionally, you're probably a lot tougher than people that do jiu-jitsu recreationally. So yeah, it's an incredibly demanding thing to do. Yes, and it's not, especially at this time, it's not a career that would have been without its risks, because Sophia's character arc kind of demonstrates that, when you do have these beautiful things, that there are going to be dangerous people that are attracted to it, and that's something that you need to be aware of as well. So you are, as a maybe a poor girl jumping out of one set of dangers into like another dangerous scenario, as kind of Sophia like demonstrates with with her story. As well. So yes, and it's the other thing that I really enjoyed about the ballet bits, because it did come up in certain other bits, was that this idea of class that I can think runs all the way through the book. Kind of like most of the people at the ballet, and there's a particular character looks down at Nell and thinks she's just like a gutter snipe, a thief. She's low class. She's no good. She'll never make any good of herself. She's just there to thieve and do all that sort of thing. So it is really about, I found that interesting how like class played kind of a part in that part of the story, because I think that's something that Benjamin Murdstone is obsessed with, as well as this idea of class and raising his station. And, Nell's also probably obsessed with that a little bit. As well,
but kind of less about the station and more about kind of the security part, but also the kind of the following the dream. She genuinely loves to dance, and it was all kind of on this experience she'd had with her mum, who was a seamstress, and she'd gone to a ballet, and the ballerinas had kind of fawned over her and told her she was a natural. And I'll be honest, there was a bit of me that was worried about how she was pinning so much on these dancers telling her what 5-year-old, less than that girl, that she was a natural dancer. That doesn't necessarily mean she is. They could just be nice girls enjoying the company of this kid and teaching her to dance, kind of thing. So I was worried a little bit about that, but I do like that. In general, it is a very nice story of that kind of, go for it, see if you have got that talent, and if you have, go for it. And it was interesting as well in those ballet bits where it's talking about Sophia's other students, and kind of like, this one's got the talent but she's not got the passion, and this one's got the talent but she's in it for the wrong things. She's in it to impress people rather than because she loves the dance. And that was a nice section as to why Nell really was a good fit. So there was another bit of the story that I really liked. I really liked when the story became Inception. And Minos went inside his dreams, and then, but what is that Minotaur dreaming? Went inside his dreams. It's not as cheesy as I'm making it out to be. It was genuinely really well done, and I found that really interesting. And then, sort of just how big a theme memory was. I mean, you already mentioned it, but yeah, I love books that talk about memory and found that really fascinating as well.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. And it's not just Nell's memories. Or basically all the characters, like memories of things that they've far forgotten, and how that kind of shapes the way that they're behaving at the moment. I think it's kind of quite a big thing.
Yeah, there's kind of Nell's like memories of her mother as well being a big thing. So she'd said to Minos about her mother, but not really told him everything. Someone's talking to Minos about Nell's mother leaving her. And then there was a quote that I really loved. Very sad, but because it was very powerful, that was Nell's mother didn't leave her, Nell couldn't follow where she went. That was oh god, the grief in that was just beautiful. And there's another one near the end about grief is the echo love leaves in its wake, and both of those quotes were really powerful.
Cool. So this is kind of like a wintry novel, so I think this is like a very decent. This might not have been a bad shout to kind of do this as our Christmas special.
Well, I didn't realize. And then it was as I was listening, it was like it's Christmas Eve, and I was like, oh, okay. Because it's not so Christmassy that you have to listen to it around Christmas, but if you're listening to it in the winter months, it suits, doesn't it?
It suits. Kind of like it's very like cold. London plays a really big part in the story. We haven't really even kind of got into discussions about representations around like Poseidon and the river waters and stuff like that, but I'm just kind of a bit wary of the time. Is there anything else that kind of stood out to you?
There was another bit that just you reminded me of then, because I do really like in this how it has some kind of subtle fourth wall breaks, in the sense that it kind of talks directly to you as the one experiencing the story. It's interesting because they were obviously written for the physical book, right?
Yeah.
You have kind of like, as you're sitting by the fire with this book and stay with Nell a few more pages and things like that, which poses a very interesting question for how do you change those to suit someone who's listening? And more importantly, because I think there are definitely ways you can change those for someone listening, right? But with it being very much kind of transporting you back to the 1860s, would changing them to suit the listener be at the detriment of that setting? Would it feel too modern to talk about it in that sort of way? Or would you have to make more of a shift to do that, and it would have to be more, you get rid of the book part in general and you're just talking straight from narrator to listener of, but sit with me a while and you make it more personal in that way kind of thing, would be interesting. So what they chose to do in this one is they didn't change it, and I am a bit disappointed about that, because it did take me out of it a little. It did feel like it's not been properly changed for the listener, but I appreciate some of them were certainly difficult examples to do.
See, that's not something I picked up on at all.
Fair.
I didn't. Yeah.
And I kind of, I still liked that it was speaking to me, even though it felt a little bit like it wasn't actually to me. And then kind of, the tying it into your real life bit, I kind of liked a little bit as well. And then kind of little things as well as, as I say, I think there's 15 minutes of the book that is a repeat. There were also some other little audio things of kind of like, I think certainly at the start it was a bit clicky, and there were definitely some points where I felt like edits hadn't quite been made, so as in like there was a very long pause that needed cutting. Maybe there could have been more pause with some of those change of perspectives. Oh, and there was another one also of kind of like there was a definite point you could tell this was a new day of recording. Maybe the mic wasn't in the same place. It definitely shifted tone, kind of thing, and it made his character voices sound very different. So some things like that were a bit of a shame that they drew back on my experience, but regardless, overall I still think the audio was fabulous because the narrator was so fabulous. And I definitely recommend it in audio.
I'd wholeheartedly agree. I think it's a brilliant a story that's brilliantly narrated, and it's kind of, it's the great thing about books, and it's the bad thing about books, is that there are so many brilliant books out there to be discovered, and we probably won't touch on half of them, just like a very small percentage of them, because it's hard to discover books like this. I hadn't come across this at all before. So I think it's a wholehearted recommendation for me, and it's a great one to be listening to now as it's kind of freezing January weather as we're recording this. Any closing comments, Poppy?
I don't think so. No. Agree with you. Would recommend it. And keen to know what you guys think about, the kind of questions we were discussing and stuff like that. If you have a listen and want to get in touch with us, please do. We'd love to talk about it more.
Yeah, cool. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can get in touch with us by email at audiobookishpod@gmail.com. We can be found on social media. Our handles on all platforms will be audiobookishpod. Please continue to support the podcast by leaving a rating or review, or you can leave a tip in the tip jar. We've also got a Patreon and other crowdfunding things that are going on. Thank you very much. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. Say bye, Poppy.
Bye.
Bye.